This is lesson 123. We're going to find the x and y intercepts of a function. So today we're going to find the x and y intercepts. Now, as a quick review, if you remember, a point on a graph, which is also on the x-axis, we call an x-intercept. A point on the graph, which is also the y-axis, we call a y-intercept. So if it's on the y-axis, y-intercept. If it's on the x-axis, x-intercept. Now, if we know that, we're going to extrapolate that information and be able to determine what our x and y intercepts are. So when we find the intercepts of a graph, of an equation, we are going to create two separate scenarios. So given an equation involving x and y, we find the intercepts of the graph as follows. To find the x-intercept, they have this form, which means we write our answer as a point, but we set the y equal to 0 in the equation and we solve for x. So to find the x-intercept, we set y equal to 0. And likewise, to find the y-intercept, we write it in this form. Notice the x value is 0, so we set the x equal to 0 and we solve for y. And then graphically, we can just look at it and determine it. So graphically, these two values right here, those are my x-intercepts, so -1 and -1, 0 and 1, 0. And my y-intercept is here, which is going to be 0, 1. So having said that, here's the definition. I wrote it here. To find the x-intercept, we have to set the y equal to 0. So that means you replace every y in your equation with 0. And once you do that, you just need to solve for the missing variable. So I plugged in 0 for y, which is the same as x minus 2 squared equals 1, right? Because 0 squared is just 0. 0 added to anything is anything. So now to get rid of that square, we take the square root to both sides. And now I'm going to get x minus 2 equals plus or minus 1. So that means I need to add 2 to both sides. So because it's plus or minus 1, that means it's two separate ones, one with a positive 1 and one with a negative 1. So I get 2 plus 1, which is 3, 2 minus 1, which is 1, when your y equals 0. So writing it as our answer, we need to say 3, 0, and 1, 0. When we express your x and y intercepts, we express the answers as a point. So now let's look at the y-intercepts. Now to do that, you have to plug in 0 for x, or you set x equal to 0. So if I plug in 0 for x, you get this statement. 0 minus 2 squared plus y squared equals 1. Solve for y. We need to get y by itself. So negative 2 squared is 4. Subtract 4 on both sides, I get y squared equals negative 3. If I square root both sides, I have a negative inside the square root, which is the same as an imaginary number. Now, if you ever get no solution or an imaginary number or undefined, the assumption is going to be that there aren't any of those intercepts. So in this case, because we were looking for the y-intercept, there isn't going to be any y-intercept. Now, if you were to take this and plug it into a graph, you would see it. If you plug this right here into Desmos, this exact statement into Desmos, you're going to see how there's going to be no y-intercepts. Let's look at this next one. So let's find the x-intercept. To do that, we set y equals to 0. So if I plug in 0 for y, I get this statement. Now I need to solve for x, add 1 to both sides, square root both sides. I get x equals plus or minus 1. Remember, we have to write them as a point. So negative 1, 0, and 1, 0. To find the y-intercept, I set x equal to 0. So if I plug in 0 for x, 0 squared minus 1 is negative 1. Now we have to write it as a point. So 0, negative 1. For this one right here, our last one, if I wanted to find the x-intercept, I plug in 0 for my y. So I get x squared equals 1. Take the square root of both sides. I get x equals plus or minus 1. So that means my x-intercepts are going to be 1, 0, and negative 1, 0. For the y, I have to plug in 0 for x, so I get 0 squared minus y squared. Divide both sides by the negative, I get y squared equals negative 1. Square root both sides, because I get imaginary numbers, no y-intercepts. So this one only has x-intercepts. So, concluding today's lesson, what did we learn? We learned how to find the x of y-intercepts on any graph. How do I find the x-intercept? You plug in 0 for y and solve for x. How do you find the y-intercept? You plug in 0 for x and you solve for y. This does conclude our lesson. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments.